Hello, hello, welcome back. It is still the morning on the East Coast and definitely on the West Coast. Good morning to any folks on the West Coast that might be watching. We certainly hope that you are enjoying the My Life is a Gift Suicide Prevention Awareness Summit brought to you today by Silence the Shame. We have had some incredible speakers. Oh my gosh, Paige, Rhonda, Jewel, Tanya, Judge Morris, Spirit. Oh, what a morning, what a morning. The creative pause, because it is about self-care and wellness and pouring back in ourselves on a daily basis, right? So that we are equipped with healthy ways to cope with all that life brings us from a stress perspective. And so I honor you and greet you and are just grateful to everyone that is tuned in today and that gave up their Wednesday, their hump day, the first day of fall, to be with us. So thank you again, kings and queens. And we're about to really be in for a treat, another wonderful session that is going to be led by Dr. LaCleisha Izzard. She is phenomenal, and her session is engaging BIPOC students to address the risk of harm and suicide. I'd like to welcome Dr. Izzard. I'm going to kindly bow out gracefully and turn it over to you, Dr. Izzard. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I am excited to be here on today and sharing this powerful, powerful topic related to engaging BIPOC students to address the risk of harm and suicide today. So we are going to jump right in, you all. My background is pretty simple. I am a mental health professional of more than 15 years in the area of mental health and substance use and just so many different areas related to mental health and mental wellness. So this is a passion area of mine. So we are going to jump right on in. And I wanted to start with helping you all to understand first about BIPOC youth mental health disparities and what those really look like with young people of color. And so when we first begin to look at some of the research related to the mental health disparities, it speaks about BIPOC youth and how many of them end up in the juvenile and criminal justice system. Okay. And once they end up in these systems, they're letting you know that many of these youth of color have mental illness. And this is an area where we've done a lot of work and research around and looking at even more of what the treatment even looks like in juvenile justice systems and criminal justice systems. And we also realize that many BIPOC youth, they do not even get treatment until they reach some of these these systems. So it's important to see that particular mental health disparity. Looking more at the Native American or Pacific Islander population as it relates to young people of color, rates of PTSD, alcohol abuse, and mental health are extremely high with youth with that background. Also, youth of color that identify with more than one race of color report more mental health related challenges. Okay. Culture differences and misunderstanding as it relates to healthcare providers. Okay. It seems to contribute more to the diagnostic problems as it relates to BIPOC youth. And the reason why that is some of the racial disparities that we see in the mental health care system. Okay. Moving right along. As we look at more disparities as it relates to barriers of treatment, one of the main ones that the research mentioned is the low socioeconomic status among children of color. This is a huge disadvantage, and this is why, okay? Many young individuals who fall into this lower poverty line as it relates to socioeconomic status, there are more mental health difficulties with this particular racial minority group. Okay, and I'm not going to read all those statistics to you, but you can see those and you see which group has the highest percentage. African American youth at about 39% there. Okay. Moving forward as it relates to young people experiencing poverty and these mental health disparities, what the research lets us know is that there are more stressors for these young people. And this is why, because they have fewer buffers that counter that stress of what they're experiencing related to poverty. Lower socioeconomic status interacts with more difficulties with quality education, housing, unsafe neighborhoods, and even more as it relates to discrimination and racism and oppression. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But those are some of the common areas related to some of these disparities around barriers to treatment. The poverty level, low socioeconomic status is a major challenge. Now we're going to move into focusing a little bit on the racial trauma piece, because as you saw, that was a common area related to these mental health disparities as well. And this is why. Racial trauma refers to mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias, ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. It's important to see all of that within that definition of racial trauma. So I'm going to review it just one more time for you. It refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by racial bias, ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. That's a lot in there. And when you think about our young people and what they experience in those different areas, we can already see and imagine the trauma that's associated with that, especially being at a very young age and still developing. Okay. And so the research lets us know and goes on to say that for the BIPOC community, as it relates to Black Americans, Indigenous, and people of color, that is the most vulnerable population. So our young people are at greater and higher risk for racial trauma, which also has an immediate and a lasting disruptive effects, okay, on our young people's psychological and development as they're matriculating through their growing periods and stages of life. It affects their physical and their mental health. Early and chronic exposure to racial trauma, okay, this can be absolutely detrimental to our young people because there becomes difficulty in regulating their emotional and their behaviors later, even in life. So even as they start to reach young adulthood, we will start to see more challenges as a result of racial trauma. And this again is key to their mental health and their overall well-being. So as we can see, when young people start to experience racial trauma, there are long-term and lasting effects that can affect their overall well-being. Looking a little bit further and deeper into racial trauma among BIPOC youth, some of the examples related to some of this racial trauma are microaggressions, okay? Extreme violence that they may experience, racial slurs, physical and cyberbullying from school peers, also related to profiling anytime they get into situations with the criminal justice system. So again, there's a whole slew of different types of racial trauma that our young people can experience, but the effects are still many times the same for all. So as a community, their mental health burden is greater as a result of these social stressors that they face, whether it be directly related to them or indirectly. And let me speak a little bit on the indirectly piece, because there's a term now that's out there that's called historic racial trauma. Also, there's a term that's out there now called race-based stress trauma, okay? All of this can be connected to indirect. So historic can be really generational stories that are passed down about experiences that people of color have had as it relates to racial trauma. When that is shared with a young person, that could directly affect them. Okay. And then also just the stress around seeing it in the media, hearing it on the radio. All of this is still indirect and can cause stressors and injury to our young people. Okay. Moving forward, looking more still at our BIPOC population and how they are vulnerable. This is why, because they are still in their early stages of psychological and moral development. So they're trying to understand and figure all of this out, even though they're experiencing it or they're even hearing it from other individuals within their culture background. So absolutely, they need support and attention, okay, when they are a witness to violence and trauma and even hearing about it indirectly, okay, especially when it's happening to people that look like them. Now I wanted to show you a little visual here, okay, to help you to visualize again what some of these effects are for our young people as it relates to racial trauma. Here we go. Let's look at this picture here, okay? Think about it for a minute as you're looking at this child of color. Okay. And even look at the child and how the child is sitting and the nonverbal behavior. Let's look at all of this because when we really think about it, whether we're adults or whether we're talking about our young people, we all have experienced some of these mental health effects around racial trauma. Okay. So let's take a look and break this apart for a minute. Feeling disconnected and lonely. When you think about the experiences that you've had related to racial trauma, those that you've seen young people have, those that you've seen on the media or that you've heard on the radio, there are times where we feel disconnected. I know for even myself, there's been times where I have felt as though I just really didn't understand, or it took me a while to process what I was hearing or what I was seeing or what I knew that happened. So that disconnect is huge, okay? Second guessing things. Again, remember how I said I was kind of unsure or misunderstood? We can sometimes second guess ourselves. And again, think about our young people. They're still developing. So think about what it's like for them. Then decrease in hope, okay? As we think about the future for our communities of color, as we think about what we're seeing that is happening in government, that's happening in our justice system, okay? All of these things that affect us where we see racism, that can cause a decrease in our hope. And we need hope to continue to move forward. But it's just letting you know that this is an effect, okay? Increased survival mode. If you can think about when we started seeing even more increases in racial injustices within our community and the protest and the looting and different things like that that we were seeing on the media, many individuals feel as though they have to fight, they have to protect themselves, they have to move, they kick into survival mode, okay? And then decrease trust. Not trusting the systems, okay? We hear more and more about, and if I had time today, and I don't, but I could break down even more about institutional racism and systemic racism. But all of that has mental health effects related to it, okay? Related to racial trauma. So again, distrust within the systems of care as well. Worry, constant worry. When you're seeing these different racial injustices and experiencing racial trauma, it brings about worry, okay? And what the future holds, or what's going to happen to your young people, what's going to happen to our parents and our loved ones, okay? What's going to happen to our fields of help, all of that, okay? Increased risk of depression and anxiety, absolutely. Even when COVID hit, we began to see an uprise in rates related to depression and anxiety, especially for communities of color and BIPOC youth, okay? Trauma, absolutely, that's what we're talking about. We are now seeing in the research how racism causes in-depth trauma. And look at how it breaks it down for you, both from the present and triggering past instances. There goes that word that I spoke about earlier, in generational trauma. We think about how more than 400 years, about how the Black community has been impacted by racism. And think about the stories and the documentaries and all of that that our young people are now seeing more of, and seeing how we were treated and have been treated and still treated as a people. Trauma, trauma, trauma. Okay. And then existential questioning. How can the world be so cruel to people of color? How can our nation be so cruel to people of color? Panic, absolutely. The least little thing that you may hear about racism or trauma can cause panic, okay? And then lastly, feelings of powerlessness. Feelings of powerlessness. You can do the right thing and still end up with a horrific outcome. And many of us have experienced that. We've seen that we've done good work. We're doing things like these summits and these symposiums and different things. And then when we turn on the news again and see one of our young people, something happens to them, whether it's being murdered in the street, shot down, profiled, some injustice that happens causes us to reflect and possibly even feel powerless. Okay, so these are the mental health effects of racial trauma. And I wanted to take some time and break those down for you so that you can really envision what this experience has been like for people of color and many of us. Now, moving forward and talking a little bit more about our young people and how we even approach racism with us. Because again, we understand as BIPOC communities that we have to talk to our young people about racism because it has happened and it is still happening. So these are important conversations that we have to have. Okay, so here are just a few things that you can do as it relates to working with your young person and talking to them about racism. Using picture books, absolutely. That will help that young person to visualize and understand a little bit more about what their culture background has experienced before and is even experiencing now. So whether that is on BIPOC youth or even adults, these picture books can be a huge benefit to talking to them about racism. Asking your young person how they feel directly, okay, when they see someone that looks like them mistreated and experiencing racism. Okay, answering the question, why does this keep happening? And using different types of creative activities that are at their developmental age. The research mentioned using sometimes a ball of yarn. And every time you say something to your young person about an injustice or a racial experience that could happen to a young person or even just a person of color in general, then taking that piece of string around that yarn and tying it and wrapping it around that young person, and then continuing to bring up these different experiences and examples of what can happen. And once that ball of yarn around them gets all tangled up, then helping them to understand that this is how many times people of color feel about racism. It's all tangled up because it's so many different experiences that we've had. Many of them, it's even hard to even digest and write down. So it's a lot that we're seeing happening, but we can still move forward. And ways that we can move forward are right here. Instilling confidence in our Black children and our children of color by sharing great stories about amazing and powerful things that people of color have done. That is instilling racial identity in them, racial identity in them. Helping children also begin to understand how they can be an ally, So BIPOC advocacy at their level. I was listening to a community meeting, I think it was a few weeks back, and I saw a 13-year-old young Black male, and he was speaking about gerrymandering. And many of us know what gerrymandering is, but we know that there is a piece of racism connected to that, where there's unfair political advantage for a particular party or group by manipulating the boundaries of electoral districts. But this young male, he had went in and did his research, got other adults and people of color who have been in politics in his community, because he was really engaged in this and interested in this, and he wanted to share it more with other young people. So helping our young people to learn about ways of advocacy and community outreach and how they can get involved. That's also a way to talk to them about racism and developing their racial identity and helping them to move forward. All right. So I have been talking for quite a bit now. So I'm going to need a little assistance if we're able to do this piece or not. And if some of the attendees are able to engage in the chat, please think about this question here. What racial trauma experience have you heard from BIPOC youth? So think about it, whether it's your young person, a friend of the family, something you've seen in the media, but what racial trauma experiences have you heard from BIPOC youth, or have you witnessed that has happened to BIPOC youth? And if so, if you could just take a few moments, share that in the chat for me so that we can get some ideas about your experiences, about your emotions around some of these things that we've seen to happen with our BIPOC youth, whether you've witnessed it, whether you've heard it, or whether you've even experienced it with your own young person. So you all let me know. Can I get a little assistance with seeing if we can see what has been placed into the chat? You all let me know. All right. Hopefully we are getting some things written down there. Time for reflection. Okay. So hopefully we have gotten some of your engagement there, and you've shared some things in the chat with us. I will keep it moving to the next level. Okay. Moving right along. Now let's take a look at some alarming research, okay, that is out there related to suicide prevention and our young people of color, okay? In the past decade, suicide rates for Black youth have increased by 93%. Okay. I think it is very critical that we see this number. This is a very large statistic. Okay, you all, 93%, making it a deadly disparity in the Black community. Okay. There is now 73% of suicide attempt rates increased for Black youth in 2015 to 2017. And this was research done by the United States Black Caucus. 73% of suicide attempt rates for Black youth. Black male youth suicide rates have doubled, have absolutely doubled in the United States just in 2019 alone. That wasn't that long ago, you all. This is the population currently that is ending their life the most by suicide. Let me say that again. Black male youth suicide rates have doubled in the United States since 2019. And we know that now even more since the pandemic has hit. Black male youth are ending their life more now. While we know that there is no one single cause for suicide as it relates to the effects of it, we still know that there are factors that contribute to it, okay? And here are some of those factors. I already talked about the racial trauma piece. There is also abuse trauma, so other types of trauma. And then the lack of access to mental health care, okay? These are huge factors that can contribute to our young Black males ending their life by suicide, okay? And just wanted to put a quick video down here. You all can take your time and go to it at your leisure, but this was such a powerful video. I encourage you to look at it at your leisure. It's on YouTube, it's titled, "Black Kids Are Twice as Likely to Die by Suicide." It was so powerful just to hear what these young Black mothers were sharing about their young Black males who had ended their life. Take some time and look at that when you can. As we talk about young Black males ending their life and being the highest rated population in our nation currently that is ending their life by suicide, we absolutely need to understand whether or not there are some preventive measures that we can take to help our young Black males. Okay, this is an area that I've done a lot of research on as it relates to young Black males, as it relates to African American males. I've just did my second African American male symposium that's also available on YouTube at Brotherhood of Mental Health. But this is an area that speaks loudly to our community. It speaks loudly to me as it relates to my passion area, but also it's an area that we must address and that we all must work together to see what we can do to help prevent this. So one of the key areas that is highlighted in the research, also something that I've seen, that I've experienced with the young Black males within my community and within my family that I have known to work, is Black male youth mentoring. I even have an uncle in Greensboro, North Carolina, who has his own Black male fatherhood program where he works with young Black male fathers and mentoring them. And their rates are continuing to rise as it relates to those young Black males doing better and working through some of their challenges, mental health challenges, and fatherhood related challenges. So yes, mentoring works. But here are some of the specific areas as it relates to mentoring and why it works, okay? So mentoring has the potential absolutely to benefit our young Black males. These are some areas that we have seen to help, okay? Academics, okay? So it helps them to improve in their schoolwork. It helps their mental, social, and emotional well-being. It helps their social skills, okay, with their relationships to others, whether that's parents, whether that is peers, okay. It helps them as it relates to decrease their substance use, okay. It also helps to decrease and prevent risky behavior, okay, and even risky sexual activities behavior. Okay, so powerful again, mentoring is, okay? Mentoring is also able to lessen the negative effects, okay, of racial discrimination. We just talked about the racial trauma piece. So mentoring also helps with that. Group mentoring approaches for our young Black males. It helps to improve their social and emotional development. Okay, so remember we talked about earlier on that some of the areas that brings challenges for our youth is because they're still developing. They're in those stages of development, okay? But look at what the group mentoring can do for our young Black males as they're still developing. It helps to increase that, okay? And then the unity of it, the brotherhood of it. It helps to build trust. Remember, that was one of the mental health effects of racial trauma, was decreased trust. So absolutely, our young Black males have to increase their trust levels, okay? And also, mentoring can lead Black male youth to get counseling. So while our young Black males, they may not be at the point right away ready for therapy and counseling, mentoring can absolutely help them get there, okay? Looking a little bit more at some of the areas too that support our Black male youth as it relates to mentoring. Remember, I spoke about this before, racial identity. So it helps to develop that confidence as it relates to racial identity in them, okay? Also, the process may be facilitated by connecting Black male youth with mentors who have shared similar life experiences, lived experiences. So again, they get to talk to individuals who have experienced things that they have experienced. That's important, okay? Engaging Black men and Black male youth, okay, as it relates to the mentors that they shall have, is a potential to be useful in this regard. So again, having Black male adults to do the mentoring is huge, what the research is letting us know. Developing close and supportive mentoring relationships, okay, may also be a mechanism by which mentoring promotes positive outcomes. So again, that development, that support, all of that is a benefit during that mentoring process. Looking at some of the implications, I thought these were important to add in here for you too, okay? We have to recognize that young Black males are likely to vary in their individual needs. Absolutely, they are. Okay. So once we recognize that, then we have to be able to understand and know that specific types of mentoring supports that might be most effective for them. So then we do have to look at levels of cultural competence. Okay. And I'm getting ready to talk a little bit more about that because they vary in their individual needs. Okay. So taking care to ensure that these mentors for the young Black males, that they receive appropriate training, okay, about issues of race, culture, and gender. So it's great, yes, that they have the lived experience, but we also want these mentors to be trained in these areas of race, cultural, and gender as well, okay? Also recruiting Black male mentors who have the appropriate skills related to teaching or advocacy and cultural competence again. And then also considering how the efforts to provide mentoring for our young Black males can be linked to the fight for a larger social justice goals and racial injustices within our communities. So these were just a few of the implications that I thought were really important that you all were able to see. Looking at some of the cultural differences in treatment, won't go through all of these, just will give you a quick overview of them. But it's important that we see the cultural differences as it relates to treatment. Because when we're looking again at our young Black males and what they're experiencing, we have to be able to see these cultural differences and what can cause some of them to be hesitant, okay, about coming into therapy or about coming into mental health related treatment. So one of the main ones is cultural stigma. Okay. And so within the African American community, and we're doing a great job with what we're doing today, and many of our faith communities, they're doing wonderful things too, and incorporating mental health discussions and panel health discussions and fireside chats and things like that to talk to our communities more about mental health. But we know that that's an area that we're still working on. That's still a work in progress to make sure that we're decreasing stigma around mental health treatment and therapy within our communities of color. And then also helping others to understand that some of that stigma is around it being considered weak or thinking that possibly we don't need that type of help. And then also going back to what I shared earlier about distrusting some of the systems of care because of what African Americans and other communities have experienced related to mistreatment in systems of care. Okay. So understanding sometimes the root of where that stigma comes from is very important, and how we're able to bring about new awareness and new research and knowledge and understanding to help our communities learn why mental health treatment is a benefit. The other piece, again, is cultural traditions, okay? So there are different communities of color where they have their own traditions about what they do for mental health care, mental health treatment. For one, within the African American community, we're huge on family support. We're huge on friend support, okay? The research always lets us know that we're more prompt to go to a sister, to go to a aunt, a uncle, a pastor, a friend, to talk about some of our mental health challenges before we'll go to a professional. So again, we have to understand what our culture traditions are and what we've been doing for years and years and years, so that we can understand too more of how to break this stigma down. Community support, absolutely. That's huge, because again, we have to look at our communities around us and seeing again, if we're hearing more about mental health treatment, mental health access, and what that looks like, because that too will in turn help us to understand why our young Black males and why our BIPOC youth may be hesitant to be open to treatment, okay? A huge major barrier as it relates to treatment for our BIPOC youth is right here: implicit biases and limited cultural competence. I thought it was very important to bring this piece out, because as we're seeing even more in the research now, is that we have to have more and more cultural competent training. It has to be there, because what we're finding is that many of our providers are lacking this cultural competence, or they are experiencing a lot of implicit bias and not aware of it. And this is why they're not aware of it, because implicit bias, it occurs below the conscious awareness. It occurs below that. So there's a negative implicit bias that is automatic, okay? And it may very well manifest as perceptions of minorities, as it relates to their intelligence level, as it relates to them using substances, as it relates to them being more violent, as it relates to them being a risk, okay, for treatment, as it relates to non-compliance. So these are things that lie below the subconscious and below the conscious. It lies below that. This is what this implicit bias is all about. These thoughts and these ideas are just resting there with no proof, no knowledge, and no research bearing to back it up. Okay. And so here's one of the key areas right here where the research speaks about a lot of implicit bias as it relates to different providers who may not even be within the culture of color. Okay. So the effects on diagnoses and treatment, here's an implicit bias here, that African American male youth, okay, are disproportionately diagnosed due to the beliefs that they are violent, suspicious, and dangerous. So that's the implicit bias, that our young Black males are violent, suspicious, and dangerous. So when we think about it, for our young Black male youth who have attempted to go to treatment or attempted to go to therapy, they may have gotten a counselor or received a counselor or treatment from a therapist that did not have this research or this cultural competence training, and they had implicit bias that was still there, and it came out within that treatment. So that young Black male was either able to see that they were looked at as violent, or they were looked at as suspicious, or they were looked at as a danger. Okay, so this is critical. All right, so more implicit bias and culturally competent training is needed. So I know you're probably saying, okay, Dr. Izzard, what does culturally competent training and treatment even really look like? Okay, glad you asked that. Okay, so I have given you several cultural competent interventions here, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview. There are actually many of them, but I think what's most important to understand about culturally competent interventions and treatment, number one, is that rapport building. Number two, it's that provider dealing with their implicit bias, okay? So working through that, getting through that, and then also understanding the interventions that they can integrate, okay, other areas of theory and other areas of interventions that may be a culturally competent fit for either that young Black male or that BIPOC youth, okay? So number one is child-parent psychotherapy. And the reason why this one is culturally competent, you all, for many young people of color is because of this right here. It says relationship problems in infants and young children exposed to violence. When we think about our young people of color, they experience a lot of violent trauma, whether it's they're seeing it indirectly, whether it's happening within their community and it's community violence, but we know that they experience it. So for that reason, this is a culturally competent intervention. Next is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is my favorite. I am a CBT therapist, so I use CBT every day. So I understand the value in it in working with young people of color and even adults of color. CBT focuses a lot on our thought patterns and how we work through our problems and, the current issues that we are experiencing and how that affects our feelings, how that affects our thoughts, and how that affects our behaviors, okay? Moving right along and looking at CBT, it can easily be integrated with other theories also that can be a benefit, okay, to our young people. Structured psychotherapy for adolescents, chronic stress, okay? So again, when we're looking at interpersonal violence, we're looking at community violence, we're looking at life-threatening illnesses and different chronic stress around that, we know again that our young people are at higher risk to some of these particular areas. So that is what makes this particular intervention culturally competent, okay? Lastly, looking at these three, which I think are three very powerful culturally competent interventions, family therapy. Remember, I talked about before within the African American community, how those family bonds are so strong, and even in other units of color, okay? So this is one that can be truly beneficial to our young people. Group therapy. Remember, we talked about it even with the young Black male mentoring, how it develops that social and emotional relationship, interaction, and social skills. But it enables BIPOC youth to experience positive peer culture and provides them with those problem-solving strategies, okay? Also, music therapy, which I think is awesome. This is an expressive therapy, but it absolutely speaks to our young people of color. If we think about African American history and how we are as it relates to music and how we enjoy music, how we have it at different events, different family gatherings, and all of this. So using music therapy with our youth is absolutely essential. And I didn't put my own treatment approach on here, but absolutely my treatment approach, which is faith inspiration therapy, where I integrate cognitive behavioral therapy with Christian-based biblical values, as well as biblical principles. That has also been a benefit to the young people of color that I've worked with, as well as the African American males I've worked with, and other individuals of color. Okay. All right. Oh, I did have it on here. Sorry, y'all. So here it goes. Faith inspiration therapy right here. I just explained to you what it is, and it is available on Amazon. But what we have to understand is that for the African American community, faith is many times really rooted in their healing. It's rooted in how they move about in everyday life. So when faith is integrated in their treatment, it shows that that therapist is culturally competent because they care about what those values are that that particular African American client has within them. And then there are other communities of color, that hold strong to their faith. So learning even more about that and how to create that atmosphere for them and in integrating that in their treatment, that absolutely shows that you're a competent provider. Okay. And here we are with our community resources. I wanted to make sure that I left you all with some resources that you were going to need, that you would be able to connect young Black males to and other youth of colors. Absolutely Silence the Shame, who is doing this Absolute Summit on today and have invited me to be here. So Silence the Shame is a great community resource. The National Alliance on Mental Illness of Georgia, I serve on the board of directors. There is their website there. Mental Health America of Georgia, there's their website. 100 Black Men of America, they have an Atlanta chapter right here. They're doing great things in training and mentoring for our young Black males. The Georgia Fatherhood Program, there's their link. Georgia Substance Abuse Council, they're doing great work. Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network, the Georgia Crisis Hotline, and then the Crisis Text Line right there. So you all, we have just a multitude and a plethora of community resources right here in our great state of Georgia. Many of these organizations that I just mentioned down here too are national organizations. So you can go on their national websites, you can take assessments, you can pull off flyers, you can pull off research and resources and statistics and stats. But either way, these are community resources that will keep you connected and help you to know what to do in a time of crisis and how to help our BIPOC youth. Okay, so I hope that all of this was beneficial to you. If we have any questions at this time, if we have a little bit of time left, I would love to be able to take some of those questions. No questions? Okay. Thanks, everyone. I hope that this was enjoyable to you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Jr. here, excited about this moment in time. Listen, make sure you sign your son up to be a part of this community. I believe two things: that your son needs the opportunity to be disrupted. What do I mean? There's a lot of images coming at him, right? Images from Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat. And there's a narrative that's being created. In fact, studies have shown that our kids in 1 week, they take on and see more images than people who were born in the 1920s did in their whole life, right? And so with all these images and all these narratives, something has to disrupt that. And what needs to disrupt that? Some exposure to some great men. Listen, my son left high school with a 3.8 GPA. He's heading to the University of Mississippi. He's one of the most decorated athletes at his high school. What am I telling you this? Why am I telling you this? I'm not trying to impress you. I'm trying to impress a point upon you. The same men that I was able to expose my son to, the same leadership that I was able to give my son, I want to give to your son. Listen, I understand what it feels like for your son to disrespect you, to not be driven, to not take care of his room, to not have proper hygiene. And you sit there and think to yourself, I am doing so much and I'm trying my best. All you need is somebody to reinforce the things that you've already been talking about. And that's what this community is for. Every single Tuesday, there's going to be something special happening in this community for the next 12 months, okay? And we're going to keep this thing going. So I need you to sign up today. Slots are limited. I want to pour into your son. I want to make sure that he understands his worth. I want to make sure that he understands that God is not a retirement plan. God's plans work today. I want to make sure that he understands the power of family. And last but not least, as we get a little deeper into mentorship, I'm going to introduce him to some of the multi-million-dollar entrepreneurs who are doing some great things in the world, so he can just be exposed to millionaires. I believe that there's a millionaire vision on the inside of your child, and if I can get him to discover that purpose, he can get to the bag. He can take care of you a lot quicker. So sign up today. Family, I'm so excited. I know you can feel the excitement. I got chills right now because I know that thousands of young men are going to be in this community, and we get the opportunity to change the narrative in which they see every single day. Yeah, help me help you, okay? Sign up today. 2 ways to learn information: mentors or mistakes. We're going to make sure that he chooses mentors over mistakes. Sign up today. Flat out.